Hello and welcome to part 13, lucky number 13 of a Glastonbury Romance. Let's see if I can figure out where we were last time. Should have done this beforehand. Uh, okay, I think... Yeah, here we were. Okay, so he was talking about the first cause, and happy future. They prayed to this unknown ultimate out of their hollow boat above the gleaming current so simultaneously and so intensely that the magnetism of their prayer shot like a meteorite out of the Earth's planetary atmosphere. Something about its double origin, and something about the swift and translucent water from which it started on its flight, drove it forward beyond the whole astronomical world, and beyond the darkness enclosing the world, till it reached the primal cause of all life. So cause is capital C, in case you're wondering. What happened when such a wild goose, heart-furious arrow of human wanting touches that portion of the first cause's awareness that encircles the atmospheric circumference of the Earth? So many other organisms throughout the stellar constellations and throughout the higher dimensions are increasingly crying out to this primordial power that it can obviously only offer to the supplication of our planet a limited portion of its magnetic receptivity. And again, as all Earth dwellers discover only too quickly, it itself is divided against itself in those ultimate regions of primal causation. Its primordial goodness, warring forever against its primordial evil, holds life up only by vast excess of energy and by oceans of lavish waste. Even though the cry of a particular creature may reach the first cause, there is always a danger of it being intercepted by the evil will of this vast Janus-faced force. Down through the abysses of ether, away from the central nucleus of the dualistic being, descend through the darkness that is beyond the world two parallel streams of magnetic force, one good and one evil. And it is these undulating streams of vibration, resembling infinite spider webs blown about upon an eternal wind, that bring luck or ill luck to the creature praying. The best times for any human being to pray to the first cause, if he wants his prayers to have a prosperous issue, is one or other of the two twilights, either the twilight preceding the dawn or the twilight following the sunset. Human prayers that are offered up at noon are often intercepted by the sun, for all the creative powers are jealous of one another, and those that are offered up at midnight are liable to be waylaid by the moon in her seasons or by the spirit of some thwarting planet. It is a natural fact that these two twilights are propitious to psychic intercourse with the first cause, while other hours are malignant and baleful. It is also a natural fact, known to a very few, that many of the prayers offered to the first cause by living organisms in their desperation are answered by less powerful but much more pitiful divinities. Priests of our race, wise in the art of prayer, are wont to advise us to pray to those lesser powers rather than to the first cause. And they are wise in this advice, for whereas the evil in the first cause is only partially overcome by the good, in some of these little gods, they are hardly any evil at all. They are all compact of magical pity and vibrant tenderness. It happened by ill luck on this particular occasion that the prayer of their creator offered up by John Crow and by Mary Crow in their open boat on the Wissey in Norfolk aroused in response not in the goodwill of this ultimate personality, but in its evil will. Neither John nor Mary was aware that if a human being prays at noonday or at midnight, it is its first cause to pray to the sun or to the moon rather than to the first cause. It is better to do that. Chances led them to pray on this occasion almost exactly at 12 o'clock, and although their prayer reached its destination unintercepted by any other power, it lost itself not in the ultimate good, but in the ultimate evil. Was it a dim intimation of this that led John to redouble his furious strokes as he rowed their boat down the Wissey? The sweat began to pour down his face as he tugged at those long oars, and his mouth, open now and twisted awry, began to resemble the fixed, contorted lineaments of an antique tragic mask. Mary was divided in her mind whether to call to him to stop or to let him alone until he stopped of his own accord. Assisted by wind and tide as well as propelled by his desperate efforts, the boat shot forward now with an incredible speed. The girl had grown by this time more skillful with the rudder lines. John, in the tension of his rowing, kept more even time than he had done before. Thus, though their speed was much greater, they seemed to avoid the beds of reeds that the river curbs, and the shallows opposite the deeper pools, and the floating masses of cut weeds that they overtook with much greater facility than when they were casually drifting. "I'll make him stop in a minute," she kept saying to herself, and then something in the very effort they both were making, he to row and she to steer, something almost religious in their united tension, compelled her to concentrate upon what she was doing and to hold her peace. Past deep, muddy estuaries the boat shot forward, where the marigolds grew so thick as to resemble heaps of scattered gold, flung out for largesse from some royal barge, past groups of tall Lombardy poplars, their proud tops bowing gently away from the wind, past long-maned and long-tailed horses, who rushed to look at them as they shot by, their liquid eyes filled with entranced curiosity, past little farmhouses with great sloping red roofs, past massive cattle sheds tiled with those large curved brick tiles so characteristic of East Anglica, past sunlit gaps and majestic woods through whose clearings tall flint church towers could be seen in the far distance, past huge black windmills, their great arms glittering in the sun as they turn, grinding white flour for the people of Norfolk. Past all these the boat darted forward, rowed, it seemed, by one relentless willpower and steered by another. And as he swung his arms forth and back, repeating his monotonous strokes with grim pantings and with a glazed, unseeing look in his eyes, it seemed to John as if merely by making this blind, quixotic effort, he was on the way to ensure a happy issue for their love. He had prayed to the first cause, and the superstitious idea took possession of him that the longer he kept up the struggle, the more likely he was to get a favorable answer. He was indeed a good deal more exhausted already than his coxswain had any notion of. Coxswain. If she had not been compelled to concentrate her attention on rounding the river curves, she would have marked how pale his lips were growing, but she too was wrought up to a queer hypnosis of blind tension. Even now and then she would cry out, "Right, John!" or "Left, quick! Left, I tell you!" But apart from these brusque words, she remained as silent as he. One effect this nervous madness had. It united them as nothing else could have done. The longer this tension lasted, the closer these two beings drew together. Casual amorists have indeed no notion of the world-deep sensuality of united physical labor. More than anything else, this can give to a man and a girl a mysterious unity. Nothing in their sweetest and most vicious love-making had brought these two nearer to becoming one flesh than did this ecstatic toil. It may be that a blind instinct had already warned them that their prayers to the living God had only stirred up the remorseless malice in that creator-destroyer's heart. Whether this were so or not, it is certain now that some obscure and lonely fury in them turned upon the tremendous first cause, and deliberately and recklessly defied it. The two of them were alone on their Norfolk River, a man and a woman, with the same grandmother and the same grandfather, with the same grandparents in a steady line, going back to Agincourt and Crequi, going back to all the yeomen of England, to all the sturdy wrenches of England, to all the John Crows and Mary Crows that filled so many churchyards in the Isle of Ely unto this day. Again, I don't know how to pronounce British things. That might be pronounced a different way. I apologize. You get what you pay for. The silent-scaled dace and red-finned roach that their swift movements disturbed seemed actually to pursue their fearlessly speeding boat. The quivering poplars seemed to bow down their proud tops to watch these two. The cattle lifted their heads to gaze at them as they swept by. Beneath air region after air region of tremulous lark music, they flashed and glittered forward. Water rats fled into their mud burrows or plopped with a gurgling, sucking sound under the swirling eddies that their boat made. Moorhens flapped across their way with weak, harsh cries. Small, greenish-colored immature pike, motionless like drowned sticks in the sunny shallows, shot blindly into the middle of the river and were lost in the weeds. The prolonged struggle of these two with the great boat and with the water became in a very intimate sense their marriage day upon earth. I'm going to read that again. The prolonged struggle of these two with the boat and with the water became in a very intimate sense their marriage day upon earth. By his self-tasting sweat and by her wrought-up passion of guiding, these two run-down adventurers plighted their troth for the rest of their days. They plighted it in defiance of the whole universe and of whatever was beyond the universe. And they were aware of no idealization of each other. They clung to each other with a grim, vicious, indignant resolve to enjoy a sensuality of oneness, a sensuality of unity snatched out of the drifting flood of space and time. It was not directed at anything beyond itself, this desire of theirs. It was innocent of any idea of offspring. It was an absolute, fortified and consecrated by the furious efforts they were making, by the diamond-bright sparkles upon the broken water, by the sullen clicking of the rowlocks. John had begun to count now. I'll stop away 20 more strokes, he thought. But when the last of the 20 came, and he found in the beating pulse of his exhaustion an undreamed-of nerve of renewal, he did not stop. The dazzling spouts of water drops which followed his oars, each time he drew them from the water, mingled now with a renewed counting. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Those rhythmic, upflung splashes of dancing crystals, stirred and subsiding amid the long emerald-green weeds, became the thudding reverberation of his own unconquerable heartbeats. These again became triumphant figures of victory over nature, over custom, over fate. 16, 17, 18, 9. He never reached his second 20. Disturbed by the appearance of a living javelin of blue fire, flung forth from a muddy ditch, darting like a gigantic dragonfly, down the surface of the river in front of them and vanishing round a bend of the bank, Mary gave a startled pull to her left rudder string, and the prow of the boat, veering in midstream, shot with a queer sound, like a sound of snarling and snobbing, straight into the overhung mouth of the weedy estuary, out of which the kingfisher had flown. John fell forward over his own knees with a groan. His shoulders heaved silently under his heavy, sob-drawn breathing. He was lost to everything except the necessity of finding free and unimpeded breath. Mary sat quietly out on where she was. I'll go to him in a minute, she thought. Better let him get his breath first. She could not see his face. She could see nothing but his head and his knees. But she knew, without seeing it, that his face was quite hideously contorted. She noticed that something wet was falling down from his face upon the plank under his feet. She peered forward and stared morbidly into the darkness at his feet. Was blood dripping from his mouth? Dear God, she cried in her heart, have I killed him by his foolishness? The cry was followed by such a wave of love for him that she could hardly bear it and remain passive any longer. She wanted to throw her arms around him and press his head against her thin chest. This feeling was followed by another one of an egoistic tightness and self-pity. It would be just like my fate, she thought, just like the way everything has happened to me all my life, if he has consumption, and this has given him a hemorrhage. She remained rigid, her heart beating, holding herself in by an effort of the will. At last his breath became quieter. For a few seconds after that, his head seemed to sink helplessly down. It looked almost as if it would touch the plank between his knees. The oars, still clutched tight in his hands, stood up at a grotesque angle. Are you all right, John? She whispered at last. He did lift his head at that and smiled at her, drawing a deep sigh. Exhausted, he murmured. I was a fool to go on so long. Lean back a bit in the boat, she said. He tried to obey her, and she got up to her feet and crossing over to him took the oars from the rowlocks and laid them side by side. As she did this, she thought to herself, John and I are one now. Nothing in those hateful ruins will be able to divide us now. She helped him to lie down on his back in the prow of the boat, with his arms extended along its sides and with his head against the acute angle of its wooden bow. Give me the flask, my sweet, he murmured. His overcoat was in the stern, and she had to move once more down the whole length of the boat to get it. As he watched her doing this, a most delicious languor ripped through him like a warm tide. Something weak and clinging in his nature derived a special satisfaction at that moment from being tended to by this girl. She is what I've waited for all my days. After he drank the whiskey, Mary began to wonder whether she ought to suggest their having their lunch here in this Kingfisher ditch. She was secretly very adverse to doing so. In her mind's eye, all that morning, she had pictured herself spreading out a Virgilian repast of mossy grass and under great trees for herself and her lover. Anyway, it would be much nicer to leave this ill-smelling boat for a time and stretch their legs on the land. I'm going to explore the neighborhood, she said at last, getting up upon the seat where he had been rowing, and seizing a willow branch wherewith to pull the side of the boat nearer the bank. In the glow and relaxation which he enjoyed just then, her figure, standing there above him in the flickering shade of the branches she held, gathered to itself the sort of romance which of all things has always stirred him most. Both sun and shadow lay across her brown hair, parted in the middle and drawn back in a rough, simple knot, and upon her plain dress, and upon her sturdy peasant girl ankles. Very good, you beautiful creature, he murmured. You might give me a cigarette out of my greatcoat before you go. I'm too comfortable to move. She jumped down with alacrity, gave him cigarette and matches, and then stepping slightly by a second on the side of the boat, sprang to the bank. You won't go to sleep and let it drift out, will you? It's fast in the mud. But you don't think I ought to tie it to the tree? You will run off and explore, my pretty one, he said. I'll deal with the boat. I think we'll leave it at there for today. I went a little bit overboard because I was, it's a nice day out and I was in a good mood. So, that was very metaphysical, that part, all that first cause business and duality of cosmic forces, fate, prayers being misspent to a Janus-cited whimsical, perhaps malevolent god. Let me know what you think about that. It's kind of interesting, heavy stuff, isn't it? Maybe? I don't know. Well, hang in there. See you in part 14. Cheers.